Here's something a little bit different. I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison of the can openers on these three knives. This is a Leatherman. This Leatherman is about 22 years old, so keep in mind that they may have made some changes to the design of the can opener on their Leathermans. I don't have any idea. Again, this one's 22 years old. This is my little Victorinox pocket knife that I carry on a pretty regular basis. And this is an old school, probably mid-70s Boy Scout knife. Kamp King Scout knife. Okay. I'll show you the can openers first. This Leatherman, the can opener is, let's make sure I'm in frame here, is kind of chunky. It's very thick. It's pretty thick, and it's got a pretty steep grind. Oops, getting out of the picture. Got kind of a steep bevel on it, or I don't know if that's steep or flat, but it's also very dull. It's been very deburred, very tumble deburred, and so everything's rounded off. Doesn't really have much of a cutting edge. The can gripping hook here is all kind of rounded off from all their tumbling deburring. And again, this is 20 years old, so I don't know what type of changes they may have made to their current manufacturer of can opener. Very robust, very thick, very sturdy, very well locked. Locks really well. This is the Victorinox. Let's see, the can opener's right. Nope, that's the. Here's the can opener. You can see it's also got a screwdriver tip, and so it's kind of a multi-purpose. But it's very thin. It's got a good thin cutting edge and a nice bevel, and it's got almost, you could feel a little bit of an edge to it. Got a very prominent hook, can gripping hook, and like I said, a nice thin cutting edge. Also locks really well, got a good lock to it. And then here's the old Kamp King. Okay, it locks out really well, but look at the difference in this can opener. Got a very steep, very well rounded can hook, or edge hook right here, and a very deep point. It tapers evenly. It doesn't have a beveled edge on one side or the other. It just tapers evenly to a point, and it's got a lot of leverage. Okay. Now I'm going to show you too. I've started opening some cans, and I'm going to show you here. This is the Leatherman can. And you can see I'm trying to do this so where I don't spill a bunch of stuff. Try and get my angle here. But it's a really thick cut with the Leatherman. Very thick opening. Now, one of the things that I ran into with the Leatherman is that when you get to a point that's past halfway as you're cutting around the can, it starts to put too much leverage on the center of the lid, and you'll get to a point somewhere in here where instead of just continuing to cut, it'll start pushing the lid down into your food product. Just like that. And it actually gets kind of hard to cut, and then you get to a point where it doesn't really cut the lid at all and just sort of pushes the lid down into the can. So in my opinion, Leatherman's kind of a fail. Now, the Victorinox, it does a pretty good job if you're cutting, when you first start, your first couple of forward cuts. Now the difference with the Victorinox is it cuts forward instead of cutting backwards. Okay, so when you get your first couple of cuts, it does pretty good, but then it starts to kind of fail a little bit and get to where it doesn't cut that well, and you got to take really small cuts. And what I found is that it's better actually to take snap cuts where you're actually cutting maybe 1/8 of an inch of material and cutting and actually making a new cut every time instead of trying to continue one cut around the can. It's actually easier to make one cut at a time and work your way around the can. The drawback to that, and obviously you want to be careful with all of your lids, no matter what type of can opener you're cutting, but it generates one heck of a very serrated, very scary lid here, and a lid that you really have to be very, very careful with. The other thing, though, you'll notice is that as you cut, the action is actually lifting the lid up out of the food product, which that's pretty cool. So that's pretty awesome, and you could actually get to a point where you can, you could hold this enough I can hold this and actually snick that lid right off. So that's cool. So it works pretty good. It does a decent job, I think. Now the Kamp King here, this is the real deal. This is a can opener that works really well from start to finish. It makes a nice even cut, a nice deep cut through the can. And as you get around the can, it continues to cut, and you don't have any folding of the lid. The lid isn't trying to fold itself down into the food, and you get to a point, again, like the Victorinox, where it'll actually start to lift. The action of the opener will actually lift the lid up out of the food product, which is really cool. Now, one thing I have noticed is you cannot get, well, I did at that time, but the last couple times I used it, I couldn't get that last cut where I actually snicked the lid right off of the can. But this time I did. So the best of the three for me, the one I like the most, is the old school Kamp King.